Welcome to the Card Pool. I'm your host, Stu.
And I'm Kyle.
And today we're doing a magic moment looking at the set of Eldraine.
Yes, Throne of Eldraine to be exact. And this is a very exciting new set. We got a lot to talk about, so let's say we dive right on in and tackle some of these themes and mechanics to start off with.
That sounds like a way to be. Go ahead and get rid of the cold in the water. So theme mechanic number one we're going to be looking at is Adamant. And we'll be looking at a card called Silver Flame Ritual. So we're not going to look at the odds and outs of this entire card, but pretty much what Adamant is. And it reads, if at least 3 white mana was spent to cast this spell, creatures you control gain vigilance until the end of the turn.
In addition to the +1/+1 they already were going to get from you playing the spell. So Adamant is one of those add-on mechanics, like we saw Addendum recently in the recent Ravnica set, where if you play a card during a certain time, you get a certain bonus.
Yep.
This is a mechanic, Adamant, that rewards monocolored deck building, plain and simple.
Yeah.
Although, I will say, while it's an interesting strategy, and I like, personally, cards that support monocolor strategies, this one just doesn't hit it out of the park for me in terms of long-term viability.
Maybe yes and no. I mean, you could still use this in a dual or tricolor deck because you're going to be using a lot of lands to produce different kinds of mana. So being able to get to that 3, like you'd be like, all right, I just need the regular effects, but getting the vigilance would be something I need a little bit more, so you could hold on to this for later. It's not just completely dead in the water if it's not in mono, so this could work. But again, depending on what the specific card is with this effect on it, it has a different value. And that's pretty much what you're saying right here.
Well, and as a whole, Throne of Eldraine does kind of reward monocolored deck building, which again, I think is very, very cool because there's not enough of that. But like I was saying, mostly you see the Adamant on commons and uncommons. I don't think there are any rare Adamant cards, but they're just really low impact.
Yeah.
Like this card, for example. This is something in a draft, sure, I would play the heck out of this. But in Commander, no. I don't think so. There aren't any Adamant cards that I would go out of my way to play.
I mean, again, if you're using a proliferate build, I mean, that right there is good for it. Adding the vigilance on it as well makes it so you're not as vulnerable. But, you know, I digress. We'll go ahead and we'll move on to another mechanic, though.
Yeah, this one I'm much, much more excited about, so I will go in depth in this. And it's Knight Tribal. So Knights were that tribe that we never actually knew we wanted until Wizards just gave them to us in full force over the last year or two. And in Throne of Eldraine, they took it up to a whole new level, because this is nuts. So if we look at a card like Acclaimed Contender, for example, I mean, just ignore the tribal aspect of it. That just card advantage stapled onto this in white, a color that generally doesn't have a ton of that, is crazy.
I don't agree with that sentence whatsoever. But either way, if we go ahead and we read this card, is when Acclaimed Contender enters the battlefield, if you control another knight, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a knight, aura, equipment, or legendary artifact card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. That is a paragraph and a half right there. But pretty much the whole thing of what you're saying with this is like they now have more synergies for knights. You can tutor for them easier. There's anthem effects. There's now, well, this isn't impulse. This is more like, what kind? This isn't a tutor, more or less. It's a revealed only.
Yeah, it's one of those like
topographical
sort of effects, except not really that. It's kind of weird, but the point is that they started introducing Knight Tribal back in Dominaria, but there just wasn't enough of it to make a viable deck.
Yeah.
But now with Throne of Eldraine, it is very, very viable, and in 3 different colors too. There's mostly the black and white Knights are the ones that I'm excited about. The red ones are I wouldn't really bother with them.
We're not at that point yet. I mean, you could just go ahead and use the Changeling Commander and just make it all big, happy family.
That's true.
Skittles.
You absolutely could. But yeah, there are a ton of new great support cards. The Circle of Loyalty is nuts.
That's a great one.
And yeah, there's a couple new ones. We'll see them later on. They're just really, really good. So I am very, very excited about this. And it sort of focuses on legends and equipments, which makes a lot of mechanical sense.
Yeah,
so.
It gives you the support that you want that you can't get everyone else to grab, so it keeps it cheap too.
Yeah, I am super cool with it.
But for the next mechanic, I love, because I'm always hungry, we're talking about food. And this card we're going to look at is Bake into a Pie.
Oh no.
So legit, what this does is whatever it's on to any kind of card, it goes ahead and it makes this kind of artifact token where you can go ahead and tap 2 and sack it to make it so that you gain 3 life. Now, it sounds a little lesser impact, and it's kind of like the effect that we saw before, where you can go ahead and get clue tokens. And, I mean, you could argue gaining life, drawing a card, which one's more valuable. I'll say typically drawing a card is a little bit more advantageous.
Yeah, and this definitely doesn't compare favorably to treasure, because that's just free mana.
Yeah, so like out of the three, this is more or less the weaker on the scale. However, it's still useful. Life gain decks are going to love this, or even kind of death and tax decks, where it's kind of like you are taking your own death and taxing it. You can now bring yourself back. You don't need to add as much stuff. This can get stapled on the cards that are pretty good. Bake into a Pie is a great form of just, spot removable in black, making so you can gain life for later if you have excess mana. And it's an artifact. You can go ahead and sack these things for other effects as well. So they're great across the board in all colors.
There are some good food cards in the set, actually, like Gilded Goose, which is kind of a weaker but weird Birds of Paradise. That might be worth it. But overall, again, just like Adamant, I think food is one of those draft mechanics where it's good in that sense, but am I going to go out of my way to play it in Commander? Probably not.
Unless the card works in your deck and it happens to have this effect tacked onto it, that's most likely the time you're going to see it. But again, you never know. We don't know what we're going to get in the future for Commanders.
Yep, and hey, food could be back at some point. So
I hope so, because I want seconds. But moving on to another mechanic here,
indeed.
and this is probably the king mechanic of this whole set.
Definitely, Adventures. This is
Adventures.
very, very cool.
So let's look at a really awesome mythic rare here, Realm Cloak Giant. Now, the way how these work, these are very interesting kind of things. They're like the split cards, but now they're not instants and sorceries. They're creatures and sorceries and instants, which is so cool.
Yeah.
But pretty much if you go ahead and you cast pretty much the instant or sorcery on this card gets exiled, and then you can later go ahead and pay the cost for the creature, and it comes into play from exile. However, to note that this only works with the coming from exile is if this spell resolves and is put there only by its own effect. If it gets exiled by anything else, it stays exiled, which kind of ruins a lot of janky infinite combos that you saw with Torrent Elemental.
Well, that's not really a bad thing in my opinion. Now, Adventure, this is something really, really cool that I never saw coming, but the best part is you
kind of saw it coming.
You don't have to choose on this. The best part is that, like you said, Stu, when you cast the Adventure part, which is the instant or sorcery part of the card, and you get that effect, the card then gets exiled. I would have been okay if that was just it. You had to pick one or the other, but you don't. Then you can cast it later on. That's nuts.
Yeah.
And it's from outside the game, so nobody can do anything about it or mess with your card.
That is not true
well,
at
I mean,
all.
you can counter it just like you could any other card.
Well, that is true, but you could Karn it, more or less. So it's like, all right, now that card is exiled. It can't even get brought back into the game. It's permanently gone. And you should actually...
Yeah, but if you cast it with the Adventure and it's out of the game, you wouldn't be able to affect it until you brought it back in, is my point.
Yeah, and if you Karn, you leave the game, you go into another game, inherently that's how Karn's effect is.
Okay,
that means that person's now playing with a 99-card deck, and they are disqualified. Easy way to win the game right there.
All right.
Just call the judge. I mean, I'd love to see that dynamic happen.
All right. Well, in all seriousness, a bunch of these Adventure cards are
That's
actually
a very serious
really,
scenario.
really good. Yes, it is not.
Yes, it
but
is.
the like Brazen Borrower, the fairy that bounces as well, the Wish Fairy that gets you cards from your sideboard, that's super cool.
I never cared for those.
There's some adventure-themed support cards in the set as well, like the 1-mana artifact that copies every adventure you cast. That's just crazy good.
And also if there's any kind of like little janky kind of cards you like, but you're like, I'm not sure if it really hits or misses, like Giant Killer is one I really like. For the creature aspect, you usually see a whole bunch of these little guys where you put them into play and it can tap another creature, and that effect's really good because you can always use it continuously to like kind of slower a stampede down, more or less. But to make a card slot go for it is kind of weak. Now, however, using it also with a kill spell tacked onto it, it's a little bit more viable now, especially if you want to get that effect in there, and it's a 1-drop working with Ranger of Eos. So like, again, it now gives a little bit more variety, where it's like stuff where it's pretty stale in the past. Well, it just got rejuvenated.
Yeah, and that's the thing. If it's a lot of these creatures are actually kind of just generic beat sticks when you cast them, but would I rather have just an instant or sorcery, or would I rather have an instant or sorcery that could later on be a creature if I really need one?
If you truly need a permanent,
I think that's better.
Especially if you use sack outlets, it just gives you more fuel if you're running out, which is incredible.
Yeah, so Adventures, I'm a big, big fan.
Now, for the next mechanic we have here, now this one's more or less under Kyle's domain because he had to explain it to me, so I'll let you explain it to the viewers.
Yes, so this is just like Night Tribal in the set. There is a comparison in non-human tribal. So it's kind of representing in this set the conflict between the human courts of knights and nobles and the wilds of Eldraine, where all kinds of crazy creatures roam. So, for example, we have this card, Grumgully the Generous, which is just one of the many cards that
awesome art,
benefits
too.
the non-humans. So, for example, this one says, each other non-human creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. There's also another one of my favorites, a Merfolk, which says whenever a non-human creature enters the battlefield, you draw and discard, which is also super, super good.
Yeah, especially in Commander, how often do you have just a tribe? I mean, there are tribal decks, don't get me wrong, but usually you have something across the board. It's like, I have goblins, I have dragons, I have humans, I have zombies, I have demons, and the list goes on. But yeah, it's a cool idea because this way it's not just like, all right, I have to use humans now if I want this effect. Like, it gave something more to the Commander crowd. And actually, if you look up at this creature one more time, if we pull this graphic up, they also went ahead and they did something from Dominaria where they made it so a legendary creature isn't rare.
Right.
Like, it's an uncommon, which is great for us Commander players. So it's not necessarily a mechanic, but I like how they've just been implementing this in the game more just for, well, our fun.
That too, and the fact that non-human tribal is so open-ended means there's a ton in these sets that can support a ton of different strategies, which makes for some great commander options, can be very narrow and work specifically with, like this one works well with goblins, but it could also slot into existing other non-human tribes. Like I said, you could build a non-human tribal deck just with all of these cards, or you could put them into goblins, you could put them into merfolk or elves or whichever one.
In this case, you could just put this in beasts. Like, if you're running a beast tribal, this inherently is a beast tribal card. It's in the colors.
Yeah, so I love the fact that it's so open-ended, and there are some pretty good cards that came out of this. So again, I'm a big fan.
Yeah. Well, now moving on to the last one. This is more or less my favorite. I'm so excited about this one. This is kind of two mechanics in one, but it's a great example of both. It's both hybrid mana and colored artifacts. Now, we're looking at a card here called Arcanist's Owl. And yes, I'm learning how to read better with each episode. This is great. So pretty much looking at the mana cost of this thing, right there we can see the split Azorius symbols, both white and blue. So right there we haven't really seen that too frequently in Magic. That's something from Shadowmoor. From that whole block we see a whole bunch of it. And it's kind of sprinkled throughout the game as we go through. So it's cool seeing them come back to this. It gives players a lot more option with like the mana intensity of cards. But also onto the note of colored artifacts, we don't see that a whole bunch. We used to see them, and then they kind of stopped it. And then they just made regular colorless artifacts, which are always expensive because every deck can use them. But now since there's a color identity to them, they're a little bit more niche. They're not going to go crazy in price. They're more vulnerable. So it adds another dynamic, which we've been like kind of asking for them to touch on again. I love this.
Exactly. I do too. I never expected hybrid mana to make a comeback so quickly after the recent
You were
Ravnica
screaming for it too.
Well, I love hybrid, but like I said, I did not expect to see it again so soon, but here it is. And also, as you said, recently in the last couple of sets, Wizards seems to be doing the full court press on colored artifacts, which I'm actually a huge fan of because you can make cooler cards, you can make potentially even more powerful ones too, but they're harder to cast. It restricts them, but also expands your options. And it means less broken artifacts that every deck can abuse.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of this idea as well. And yeah, we have both of these themes in this set. Hybrid cards and artifacts are colored artifacts are a big theme in Eldraine. We just used this card to show both of them together. I thought it would save a little bit of time.
Yeah, we'll make it easy on you guys. We're nice sometimes. But now moving away from the mechs, that is our last one. We're going to touch into our 3 favorite hidden gems that we both like in the set for whatever reason it may be.
Indeed.
As long as it's just not in the top $3 range. So looking at, well, do you mind if I start?
Oh, go ahead, Stu, yeah.
All right, my number 3, we're going to be looking at a card I know Kyle's going to hate. It's called, I can't even actually enunciate it, Iron Crag Feet?
Sure, why not?
Sure. It's I don't even think it's a real word, but whatever. It's Iron Crag Feet. It's a sorcery for 4 mana, 1 generic, and triple red. And it reads, add 7 red mana, and you can cast only 1 more spell this turn. So this is very similar to the rituals that we usually see, and typically Mana Geyser and Seething Song are the 2 most infamous that we see in Commander, but this one's also an additional one. Now there are other ritual cards out there, sometimes they're used, sometimes they're not. I argue this one would be the 3rd one that you'll see more often. Yes, there is a little bit of a tax on it. You can only cast 1 more spell this turn. However, This doesn't mean you can't use the mana for activated abilities. So you can go ahead, cast something, and use an activated ability as something else, or just get a boost to use something big. So something that I know off the top of my head that uses 7 mana is Unstable Obelisk. Go ahead, let's say you played that out on turn 3, now it's turn 4, you play this, you can now destroy any permanent that's on the field. That's a pretty good play if you ask me. But also if your commander is like a Jaya Ballard, for example, who has like mana tacked onto it for using its effects, this also can work and fuel that fire. So it's multi-purpose in what it does, and since it can't be used by every deck, makes it so it can be a gem for all you guys out there.
I guess, I don't know, maybe I'm just being too picky about these things, but it's an interesting new ritual, and I love a good red ritual spell as much as the next guy, but the fact that it doesn't let you cast anything else after that except for one card, I just don't know. You are right, though. You don't have to cast spells for this to be good.
Yeah.
I personally have just never been in a situation where I wanted to do things other than cast spells with rituals. That's kind of the point, right? It's to storm off and win with these cards.
The point is to give you that big old juicy pocket of mana so you can now do stuff. And also to note, lands do utilize mana. So like going ahead and making it so that you can use some sort of effect that's on a land, this helps with that as well.
Yeah, no, I can see where this card would potentially be good. I'm just not super sold on it.
I can see your point for it, but I'm just going to say you're wrong, and it's totally a good card. It's not used for every deck, and that's definitely the main point about this, but it can be used a lot more than what you're thinking it could be used for.
Well, we'll see. I think my next card will have some broader appeal, so I'm going to go to my number 3
Please.
here. And it's going to be, at the other end of the scale, a common, but also a red card called Merchant of the Veil. Now, this is a 3-drop creature, 2 colorless, 1 red, and it's one of our new adventure creatures. So on one hand, he's a 2/3 human peasant creature that you can tap another 3 mana to discard a card and draw a card. Or you can use his adventure side, which is an instant for 1 mana, to discard 1 card, and then if you do, draw another card. And as we noted earlier with adventure, if you cast the adventure part, you can then cast the creature from exile later on in the game. So I have a lot of thoughts about this card.
Please tell me, because I don't have many.
Well, honestly, this was one of the cards I was most excited for out of this entire set. I know that sounds silly.
That sounds
but
ridiculous.
It's true. But it may just be a common. But again, for big mana red decks like Neheb the Eternal, one that I like to play for one thing, Reanimator strategies where you like to discard and draw a lot, and also certain Storm variants of decks where you whip up a lot of mana and sometimes need more cards. This seems like a pretty awesome card for this sort of thing. There are other great red cards in this set, but this one, I think, in my opinion, outshines all of them for its just complete, total utility.
The one thing I can note that being a pro for this card is that it's not a tap effect to go ahead and discard a card and draw a card.
Right, that's the biggest
So
point here.
in theory, you could draw your entire deck.
Yes, that alone makes this worth considering.
You can't keep your entire deck, but you can draw your entire deck. So it can help enable Storm decks, so I can see that being a viable option. It's great for like the Locust God who only wants to draw cards and populate a field. So yes, it's good for drawing. I just would like a little bit more depth to it, but it works. And the whole thing that you're worried about is drawing cards and making sure you get your answers. This is fine for that, and 100% agreed with you with
I think this is such a solid card for recurring draw power for red. We never see that. Most cards that do this have
for
tap
the most
abilities.
excited card for this entire set, that isn't.
Well, it's not. This is only number 3, but I was very excited about this card.
All right.
And the adventure side, where you just discard a card and draw a card, that feels like it might be small, but then recasting the creature later on in the game after you use that turn 1, that's awesome. That's just awesome.
And the one thing I do like about this, and it's not a situation you want to be in, but let's say if you're top decking, you have a lot of mana, you have nothing to do with it, you draw a land.
Exactly.
Get rid of the land until you get something you can use. The only question is being in that situation, you should have your deck kind of more prepared for that scenario. But this either way can be a plan B to get to that, let's blow up the board kind of button.
I
So,
think best common in the set right there, in my opinion.
well,
But you might disagree with me. 'Cause
I
I know your
will
next card's a
disagree.
common.
It is a common, so I'll totally tell you why.
Go
So
on.
my number 2 is a card called Giant's Skewer. It is a black artifact as an equipment. It costs 2 mana, 1 generic and a black, and you can go ahead and equip this to a creature. It'll get a big 2/1 bonus, and whenever it deals damage to a creature, you get to create a food token, which the food tokens we talked about earlier, go ahead, tap 2, tap it, and sack it so you can get 3 life, and it costs 3 to equip. So the reason why this is kind of cool, off the grid, and unusual, so one, this is in black, and you have a way to regain life. It's not lifelink, which is usually what we end up seeing. You're getting permanence. Black doesn't mind sacrificing permanents. In fact, it loves doing that. So this could be another target for either an artifact or just letting something sack so you can get a trigger from a sack effect. The second, or third actually would be in this case, is more or less the fact that it's not when you deal damage to a player, it's a creature, which is way easier to have that work. Go ahead, put on a little zombie that just came out. It goes ahead, it dies, but whatever, you're going ahead and you're getting that food token. You can now gain life that you need to. And it's a low-costed kind of thing. It's not the end-all, be-all equipment, but it's something that when it comes out, people are going to kind of forget that you're getting this constant value from it, especially for just literally having a regular attack happen. And honestly, how often are you attacking? Kind of often.
Well, I think the reason you're looking at why this might be under the radar is because, honestly, it really doesn't impact the game, like, at all.
Oh my god.
I'm sorry, it doesn't. Like, we've already established, the whole food mechanic is sort of iffy at best, and this card doesn't make me want to play it anymore. I mean, if it gave it the creature, like, menace or something at least, okay, maybe that's something to talk about, but...
No, because it's not about hitting the player, it's about hitting the creatures.
Yeah, and honestly, I would disagree. I think doing damage to creatures in combat is a lot more difficult than hitting players.
But exactly, it also disincentivizes people from going ahead and blocking. So now you can go ahead and pierce. It's like, I don't want to give you extra value. Sometimes people don't care about it. We see it with like Smothering Tithe. They're like, all right, take the value that you want. I don't care. It's not going to make anything different when I beat you next turn. So it depends on how it goes. But this is a very off-the-grid card for in black.
Yeah.
This is not in the color pie of how black typically plays or what it wants. This is something that can definitely be utilized and can literally vex your opponents and not really see what you're getting at it as value. And there is tons of value on this card.
Well, I'm vexed as to where the value is, but I guess we could leave that up to the viewers.
You know, we'll do a little poll real fast. Would you agree with me or Kyle about this card? We'll put it up there, Team Stu, Team Kyle, and we'll see when I'm right, and I can just prove Kyle wrong. It'd be
We'll
great.
see.
But either way, moving on to your number 2, what do you got?
Indeed, yes. For my number 2, this is the rare of my picks. It is Return of the Wild Speaker. Now, let's take a look at this before I get into it. I'm too excited. It's a 5 mana instant, 4 colorless, 1 green. You can choose one of 2 abilities. You can either give non-human creatures you control +3/+3 until the end of the turn, or you can draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control. Now, we see this card immediately playing into the whole non-human tribal aspect of it. It makes sense, because this is a Garruk-flavored card.
Totally.
Who likes creatures like that. I'm a big fan of cards like Soul's Majesty and Rishkar's Expertise, because they give green the card advantage that it often does not get. However, the problem is that sometimes they can be dead draws if you don't have high-powered creatures.
Exactly.
When you play a Rishkar's Expertise, how terrible does it feel to have like a 2-power creature out and you draw 2 cards? That's just really bad. However, this new option is great because it works on either end of the spectrum. You can have a massive draw spell. Oh, or you only have small creatures. Great, you get an overrun instead. And at instant speed, this is an instant, remember. We have never had an instant speed overrun. This is awesome.
Well, it's not overrun because you're not getting the trample to go ahead and get on this.
Oh, big deal.
So that is a big deal because like the damage can't pierce through. So, and that's the point you're getting at this. This can be an end game card. It can blow out the game for you because it's kind of like
absolutely.
Who's the guy who comes down and gives everyone a big anthem?
Craterhoof Behemoth.
It's like a Craterhoof Behemoth and that one doesn't give trample either, right?
I think it does. It does.
Right.
I think so. Yeah.
Erroneous to that. My bad. I can't remember which. It was the boars then that came in, and that didn't give trample.
That didn't give.
Okay,
right.
my bad. So this can be a way to knock out a game. However, I would rather something like a Triumph of Hordes, where it's a little bit easier, but this does have the card draw tacked onto it, and yes, that's good to have in green. I've never been a fan of the one draw to the power of creature because it's not a real variable. Like you really want to be playing with that all the time. Like, all right, I don't have anything on the field. I just drew this as a dead draw. I can't do anything. I have no board state to even give a creature boost. However, you can use this in the defensive as well. Make it so your creatures get big, chump block, double block, whatever it is, and take out their army, and they don't see this coming.
Well, I also did build a whole commander deck around this. It helps if your commander kind of plays into this theme too.
Well, naturally, if any card goes to your commander, it's going to have way more value. But
so 5 mana for my Grothama All Devouring deck. Pay 5 mana, draw 10 cards. Yeah, that sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah.
That's exactly where this is going. It's the one and only reason I like it. But yeah, this is absolutely going in a deck like that.
It is a good card for that. I do like it, and again, I can agree with you with the drawing, but honestly, it's not a card I think I would ever use. But you know, to each their own.
Up to you, I guess.
Yeah, but again, me being a green player. But either way, going on to my number one, I'm going to talk about a card called Archon of Absolution. It costs 4 mana for a creature that is an Archon. No idea how relevant that type is. It's got a 3/2 flying body. It's pro-white, and it also has the ability that creatures can't attack you or planeswalkers they control unless their controller plays 1 generic mana for each one of those creatures. So we see this in white where it's a whole kind of pillow fort effect where it's making it harder for your opponents to go ahead and attack you. So it makes it so if they have a deck that goes wide, meaning a whole big token army or a giant populated field, they can't swing it with everything, and it makes it so it's harder for you to lose. Now, again, we see these, and there's maybe, 3 or 4 of these cards in white, right?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different takes on this. Like, there's Windborn Muse, there's Archangel of Tides, even, like, if you're going for non-creatures, like Ghostly Prison. It's pretty much like that.
Norn's Annex.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there is another one.
Oh, there's a couple others, yeah. So, like, there's a Legend from Dominaria that does the same thing.
That is true. I forgot about that. So we're at 5. So this is like 6. So the one thing that this is usually kind of weak on is when somebody goes narrow, when they have a Voltron strategy. It's like, all right, I'll just pay 1. It doesn't affect anything I'm doing. Maybe I can't cast this extra card I was going to do, but whatever. I'm still going to swing in and do big damage. The more of these that are on the field at one time, the harder it is for a Voltron deck to go ahead and get through. In fact, it makes it so that the whole idea of this is it's taxing the mana so they can do less and less and less. You're going to either play stuff this turn or you're going to attack this turn. Making it so one player has one phase completely gone out of their turn is massive. And this is a card that can make it so that that count gets higher and higher to make that a reality for just even mono white or control decks in general.
I see where you're going with this, and this is an interesting take on that old sort of archetype. Might be a little better than some options thanks to the extra added protection, which the other cards don't have.
Yeah.
Having flying is also nice. Not all these cards have flying, but I feel like you're giving up a lot of potential versatility and power compared to the other cards, like even Windborn Muse, which while smaller than this card and without protection, taxes them for 2 every time they attack.
You are correct about
Archangel of Tides also works on the attack or the defense with the taxing. So is this card better than those? No, I don't think so, even with the protection.
How easy is this to be tutorable? We have Recruit of the Guard now. So this is something that can be a lot more tutorable for that, considering white loves its white weenies. So
that's true.
This is now something that can be easier, because like how many other ways does white have the ability to go ahead and get the other stuff? It's not as cut and dry. Sure, you can use like an Enlightened Tutor, but usually just getting that for just 1 Pillow Fort for the next turn kind of feels bad. You need it that turn if you need a Pillow Fort. So going ahead and get something that you can get directly to the hand a lot easier, this works for great. I mean, you can argue Idyllic Tutor or something like that as well, but again, you know, that's an Enchantress deck. It probably has a whole bunch of other stuff. It would still want this deck in that as well. So it just seems like it's another thing that could be a white staple slowly growing there. Because
maybe
the stats aren't bad on this thing. It's evasive. It's got a decent enough body. It's got protection. And that alone right there means something.
Yeah, out of the 3 cards that you've picked, this is the one I find the least objectionable. Because the other 2...
I'll take that as a compliment from you,
yeah,
sure.
Look, the other 2...
That's so backhanded.
I'm really, really doubtful about. This one, I'm sort of on the fence about whether or not this is good, so I'll give you the benefit of the doubt this time.
I think, honestly, I should have probably swapped my 3 and 2, but either way. On to your number 1, Kyle.
But anyway, yeah, my number 1, this is probably one of the commander standouts of the set, as well as my favorite card, Sir Conrad the Grim. this is just super duper cool because it is the stereotypical Black Knight, because who doesn't like that? So
He always triumphs.
he always triumphs, and I think he will too, because this card has a very large block of text, but basically think of him as a super-powered blood artist. So whenever any creature dies, whenever another creature dies, whenever a creature is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad does 1 damage to each, count 'em, each opponent. And he's a 5/4 for 5, which is pretty solid itself, but then he also has that added ability of tapping 2 to make every player put the top card of their deck into their graveyard. This card is insane because it plays so well into everything Black wants to do. And somebody I was talking to made the joke, basically, this card is, whenever a creature even thinks about the graveyard, take 1 damage.
Pretty much. I like that. I like that a lot.
This is, from a commander standpoint, an excellent addition to the Mono Black Pantheon because, like I said, what does Black like to do? Let's review. Make big mana, discard, sacrifice creatures,
and
kill
reanimate.
creatures, reanimate creatures, put creatures into the graveyard
And
from the deck,
tax you.
like Buried Alive, and tax you for all these kinds of different things. And yes, this right here does all of that, and then some. And he even has this added ability where, like I said, big mana with things like Cabal Coffers and whatnot, then you can mill people to kill them eventually, even if he's not doing anything else.
It's a very unique card for how diverse it truly is, because usually in Black, it's something that's only focused around Grave Pact effects, or it's only focused about Reanimator. So the fact that this one's literally the group hug of Black, being like, all right, my fellow brethren, we're going to unite. And that's literally this guy incarnated.
Definitely, yeah, and especially, like, just for example, with a card like Necropotence, this guy just gets silly.
Yeah.
Because you can pay life to draw any number of cards. You then have to discard because your hand size is too big. They get exiled when they hit the graveyard because of Necropotence. Oh, look, I just discarded 10 creatures. Oh, well, you all take 10 damage. You know, that's crazy.
The one thing I do like is how they didn't add the whole you gain life effect, because I feel like it'd
that
be a
would
little...
have been too much. Yeah, probably would have been too much, especially on an uncommon.
But also,
Yeah.
not only for that, for the fact of how many other effects that are out there to go ahead and tax. Like, if you have a Blood Artist out with this guy, you're getting pinged for 2.
Yeah.
And if you were gaining 2 for each one, it's like...
Yeah, and alone, Mind Crank and Altar the Brood can form semi-infinite combos with this card,
Well, they
as
can
can Tortured Existence.
Well, I mean, also, they form their own infinite combo.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, I won't go on too much longer about this, but I think he is definitely my favorite card in the set, the coolest commander option to come out of this set.
He is a great commander option, and I will agree with you. It's the best of your other cards, because the other ones weren't the best.
Whatever.
But moving on to our money cards from this set, the top 3 that we weren't allowed to pick.
Yes.
First one is a Planeswalker, and a very cool artwork one at that. We're looking at Oko, Thief of Crowns. It is a 3-drop Planeswalker in the Simic Guild, 1 generic and a green and a blue. For a 4 loyalty, as soon as it enters, it has a +2 to create a food token, which we already know how we feel about that. A +1 to make it so target artifact or creature loses all abilities and becomes a green elk creature and has power and toughness 3/3. And lastly, a -5, where you go ahead and you exchange control of target artifact or creature you control with target artifact or with target creature and opponent controls with power 3 or less.
We should also note this card is $30 a pop right now.
Yeah, and it's probably going to stay up there for the fact of Brawl, for Commander, for Modern Standard, as long as it's still not getting cycled.
Yeah.
And I mean, it could be quote-unquote legacy usable since it's
it
low
could be.
cost.
All the reason this is up there right now is all early indications indicate that this is going to be a powerhouse in competitive play. And again, I looked at this originally, and you can look at these abilities, and it's kind of weird. It's really outside the box of what Planeswalkers generally like to do.
Even Simic. This isn't really a
it's
Simic
not.
card.
No, it's not. And I wasn't a huge fan of this card at all until I saw him played a few times.
It's
but
you don't need to even see it played, dude. Just read it. It's amazing.
If you have to be able to protect the card, but if you can protect this guy, he will take over the game. And it's crazy how good it is.
I don't think that's the value. The value on this card is how fast can it ulti.
Well, right, and that's not even an ultimate, really, because it only targets one thing, but that's the point. Where you're in a game, that's more fast-paced, this card can instantly start taking control of other things. Those food tokens get converted into other people's creatures. The only thing that makes me sad is you can't change the things you steal back to their original state. but that would be a little too powerful.
Yeah, I mean, but it's a good thing to go ahead, you nerf someone's commander, and then you take it indefinitely. It's kind of like a Lignify, which we're getting at here, and that's a
Yeah.
very strong effect to get on, well, blanket anything.
Yeah.
And they're both pluses.
That's the main thing, yeah.
And
that's crazy.
I mean, even if that one was a -1, it'd still be fine. This would still be a great, I mean, it wouldn't be as good, but it would still be totally valuable as a Planeswalker, and I think it's a home run. It totally is.
Like I said, on first evaluation, I was not sold, but I am now. Deceptively powerful, something that I think will be a money card for a long time to come.
Yeah, I think the only thing we really have to say is how Zedru is going to be really sad it's not in its colors.
Yeah, that's true. It's such a shame.
Yeah, really, it should so be in a Zedru deck.
Yeah.
But I can see they didn't make it mono blue, and
Yeah.
I'm thrilled they didn't make this thing mono blue.
Yeah, I am too.
But moving on to our number 2, if we're going to be
Indeed.
on this Dr. Seuss rhyme scheme. Watch the first one. You
Yeah,
got
I'll
this.
introduce this one. It's called the Questing Beast, and for $16.50 a copy right now, we have a legendary beast creature in green, 4 mana, 2 colorless, 2 green, for a 4/4 body with 3, count 'em, 3 keyword abilities: Vigilance, Death Touch, and Haste, which I guess fits because he has 3 heads. I didn't even really think of that till just now.
I was just going to say
alright.
It's Fluffy from Harry Potter.
Yeah, and the Questing Beast can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Combat damage that will be dealt by creatures you control can't be prevented. Excuse me.
Oh, you
And
want me to get it? You got it.
no, I'm good. Whenever the Questing Beast deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to target planeswalker that player controls. So let's just ignore that last ability because that's the least relevant of all of these abilities.
Well, it's pretty
It's still
relevant.
not great. It's still not bad for sure. But the rest of this card, holy crap!
Yeah.
Like no combat damage prevention. 3 awesome keyword abilities, including Haste, which is something big green creatures don't very often have, and he can't be blocked by chump creatures. This is this is just really, really good.
Well, it can still be blocked by 3-drop chumps, but I don't
Yeah,
really
but
think those are
that's-
chumps.
No, that goes beyond. Yeah, so this one kind of goes without saying why this is a money card. The stats and abilities here are amazing.
Yeah, this has so many steroids pumped into it. But I will note the 3-drop thing actually is relevant. They go ahead, they Beast Within. Well, that can now block this guy. So I'm just going to say, it's the one thing that makes it so it's very anti-green, even though it is green. But beyond that, back to this card.
Yeah.
This is an incredible card. Well, one, I mean, I took it from me. Go for it. Keep telling me why
I
it's
was
awesome.
just gonna say, because even if you then block with that token, like you were just saying, you're still taking 4 damage because of this card.
Yeah.
No combat damage can be prevented. That is nuts, especially in a green deck where you might not always have access to trample to make sure that damage goes through, but this guy makes sure it will anyway.
I don't think it gets through with trample. The damage can't be prevented to the creature. I'm pretty sure the player's life total is fine. It's not like a trample-esque effect. I'm pretty sure it means just like, if I were to go ahead and fog, the fog can't stop it. If I go ahead and make it so it's like 8.5
I see what you're
tails.
saying.
So it's not like if you go ahead and you attack with the 4 and they block with the 3, the creature's gone and you
I
take.
see what
You're thinking of
saying.
afflicts.
Yeah.
It's not like afflicts.
No, you're right. Okay, but still, I mean, even outside of that, this is a great card. A decent but kind of boring, unimaginative commander option. You could do it. I don't really know why you would. There are probably a bunch of better
No,
options.
I think this would be great. This would be a Voltron build in green, which we don't see a lot of besides maybe OG Omnath. And, well, who else would be a green, mono green?
Elves mostly.
Yeah,
Azuri.
but not even for that. For Voltron. This is a Voltron commander.
Yeah, this one could be. Yeah, it's mainly for making sure that like your damage doesn't get prevented, it's not easily blocked. Yeah, this thing, a reason again why it's so pricey right now is because it's going to be very big competitively.
I can see that. My only real gripe for this is it's not a snake or a naga subtype. It really should have that. Just look at the tail. But and also I would just like to have something as like a snake tribal commander. This could totally work with that and make it so like the rest of the other snakes go ahead, they feed off of this thing and
Yeah, maybe.
go big.
Still
But
interesting.
very good, definitely worth the price, probably for a long time after this. And
Yeah.
lastly, we're going to go for the fun Monty Python card of the set. The number 3 is Kenrith the Returned King, sitting privately high at $14.50. It is a 5-drop white creature, 4 generic and a white mana for a 5/5 body that is a human noble with a legit chromat list of effects on
Yes.
here. Kyle, you read way better than I do. Go for it.
All right, well, among his abilities, we have 1 red. All creatures gain trample and haste until end of turn. 1 and a green, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. 2 and a white, target player gains 5 life. 3 and a blue, target player draws a card. Or 4 and a black, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under its owner's control.
So, to even start with this thing, honestly, it's Chromat meets Staff of Domination. That is now a 5-color deck with a human tribe-esque atmosphere you can put into this.
Yeah,
it's a
pretty much.
5/5. It's the buy a box promo. They really put like. Again, they're just shoving steroids into some of these cards. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But how viable would you say this would be as a commander?
As a commander, I mean, it wouldn't be something that I would play because I'm not necessarily a fan of politics group hugging. But for the people out there that are, this is your guy.
I don't know if it's necessarily for a group hug. I think it's literally the most political commander you could have. And I mean, right, so it's a king.
I think it is too. I mean, like I said, in the vein of 5-color commanders, do I think there are ones that are better than this? Absolutely.
Yes.
Do I think that there are better ones if you actually want to just play the politics game? Not really. This is probably the tippy top of that whole list.
Tippy top.
I mean, it's just, yeah, if you want to play politics, Kenrith is your guy. So I think the reason this is a money card is that it's a big speculation by commander players that he's going to be long-term viable, and I think they're right. Because
maybe, I don't know, with the buy-a-box promos we've seen.
Really good.
Well, it is really good, but the buy-a-box promos where they've gone ahead and they've kind of fantasized the whole, like, this could be your commander. Like, we've seen it with Fire Song and Sunspeaker.
Yeah.
How many decks of those do you see now?
Yeah, but that card wasn't good. This one is.
It was different. It was something for Boros that was different.
Just that red ability alone, giving for 1 red, all creatures trample and haste, that's really, really awesome.
Yeah.
And the other abilities are kind of depending on the situation, but like I said, I think this is probably the king of the politics commanders.
I like that. Very punny. I like that. But all right, we'll move on to our final thing. This is going to be the impact this set has upon us. And Kyle, I'll let you go first.
All right, well, overall, if you hadn't gathered already, I'm a big fan of Throne of Eldraine. Very, very excited to play with some of the cards in the set. I think it's great overall. Not even for the fact that there's just good cards in it, the fact that it was so well designed. They meshed Arthurian legend, King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, with Grimm's fairy tales to create this really fascinating combined world. Those two things you wouldn't think would mesh very well together, but they do. And it's, outside of that, the individual cards are just great. Like I said, some things, Adamant, Food, those kind of things, I'm on the fence about competitively, but there are other cards in here that are just as good as those maybe are not. I am like a huge fan. And not to go into too much about the story aspects of this, but it's also really cool. I mean, we get the return of Garruk Wildspeaker.
That's where I'm going with mine, actually.
Rowan and Will Kenrith, 2 characters who I never expected to see again, came back in this set, which is great.
Same card.
Yeah, so this is great. Yeah, especially, like I said, getting Garruk Wildspeaker back into the fold, doing away with the whole stupid curse storyline. We're all good now.
I'm calling it. Garrick's going to end up meeting Liliana and just being like either helping her or killing her.
They went for a soft reboot of his storyline, I guess, and that's
I'm
cool
thrilled.
with me.
I've missed Garruk for so long. It was one of my favorite dudes. I mean, his cards are pretty darn good. But I like this set, too. It's good, got good style. I think they definitely learned their lesson on how to implement cards for Commander and other sets. Like Modern Horizons was a phenomenal set, but not for anyone else that wasn't Commander. So throwing in some cards that we can use in Brawl, Modern, Standard, Commander. I think they're finally getting the rhythm down. I mean, I don't know how well Brawl is going to be, but still.
Yeah, but the thing that shocks me about this is the complexity of this set. just seems really, really high to me. There's so many different mechanics and things going on, and I'm surprised that they put all of this into one set and that it seems to work as well as it
Yeah,
does.
no, they've learned their lessons, and I think that's why we've been seeing the unsets come back again to be like, all right,
There's
how
gonna be a new
we.
one too. I'm so excited.
I hate them. Anyway, but moving off of that, so I think they had a good impact. I think it's gonna at least it's gonna take some new on-site for how decks are gonna get built in the future. It's
Definitely.
just gonna depend on if we come back to any of these mechanics once again. So, but until then.
About wraps it up, I think.
So that's going to be our
yeah.
pool time in the water. It's time to get out. We're getting pruny. But either way, feel free to follow us on all sorts of our social media. Be sure to reach out to us on Reddit, Tapped Out, Facebook, Twitter. We're all at the panhandle of the card pool.
Indeed. Or you can email us at mtgthecardpool@gmail.com if you've got any thoughts or you want to help out with the channel. And, of course, stay tuned for next time. I think we're going to start looking at a brand new set.
We will indeed.
Yeah.
And we'll spoil it. We'll say it's Mirrodin.
It's, well, sort of.
Sort of.
Yeah.
That'll be our hit. It's Mirrodin. So if you want to take a guess down below which Mirrodin set it is, I'll at least shout out the person who comments it right. So until then, I'm Stu.
And I'm Kyle.
And we'll see you next time at the card pool.
Pretty well, don't you think?
Yeah.
First time for everything.